Hi students, welcome to lesson number 5 Subaltern Perspective of 𝗬𝗧, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and 𝗳𝗏𝗧𝗏. The subaltern perspective stands for understanding the society through conditions of subordination of people belonging to the different caste, class, age, gender and race. It seeks to present an alternate image of society through the viewpoint of masses, usually unprecedented. It treats peasants, tribal and other marginalized sections of the society as the makers of their own history. It emphasizes the centrality of the relationships of domination and subordination in a society in which class division is not developed as industrialized world. The major proponents of subaltern perspective in India are 𝗬𝗧, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, 𝗳𝗏𝗧𝗏, Ranjit Guha and among others. They have tried to incorporate the views of weaker sections in the writings on Indian society. On the completion of this lesson, you should be able to understand the flow of knowledge about the society from below, figure out the views of 𝗬𝗧, Dr. Ambedkar and others in understanding social phenomena, comprehend the subaltern perspective of Indian society. The meaning of subaltern. The word subaltern as given in the Oxford Dictionary stands for the general attribute of subordination which is expressed in terms of a caste, class, age, gender, office or any other way. The Germanian term subaltern means subordinate group. It includes the characteristics of defiance and submission. Thus, in literal sense, it conveys view from below, that is, a view or understanding from the bottom of society or the flow of knowledge from below. The presentation of subaltern perspective has a specific meaning for Indian academia. Its focus is rewriting nationalist history from a peasant insurgent's point of view, that is, the view from below. The subaltern perspective seeks to restore a balance by highlighting the role of politics of the masses as against the elite politics. The whole thrust of subaltern historiography is on reconstructing the other history, the history of people's politics and movement and their attempt to make their own history. One of the early empirical studies of subaltern historiography was carried out in an organizational setting. In his 1989 book Rethinking Working Class History, 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 Chakrabarty attempted to write a history of jute mill workers of Calcutta around the turn of 20th century. Subaltern perspective emphasizes not to view peasant or tribal insurgents merely as object of history, but to treat them as makers of their own history, endowed with a transformative consciousness of their own. The important proponents of this perspective in India are 𝗳𝗏𝗧𝗏, B.R. Ambedkar, Ranjit Guha, Kapil Kumar and others. Let us understand the contributions of 𝗬𝗧, Ambedkar and 𝗳𝗏𝗧𝗏 in understanding the Indian society from subaltern perspective. 𝗳𝗏𝗧𝗏 𝗬𝗧 was born in Pune in 1827 in Mali caste. His family supplied flowers to the Peshwa's household and therefore they came to be known as 𝗬𝗧. As a child, he was intelligent. He studied at the Scottish Mission School in Pune, from where he completed his English course in 1847. When he was a child, he was greatly influenced by Rights of Man, a book written by Thomas Paine. He was of the opinion that as children of God, every person had equal status irrespective of caste and creed. He had a strong feeling that our society could not progress and prosper without the proper spread of education, especially among women, and secondly, the have-nots. The socio-economic status should be alleviated. He opened a school for untouchable girls at a young age at Bide. He opened the first native library for low-caste students. In 1854, 𝗳𝗏𝗧𝗏 𝗬𝗧 joined the Scottish Mission School as a teacher and was greatly influenced by prominent educationists and missionaries such as Reverend Murray Mitchell, Professor Wilson and Professor Jones. In 1873, 𝗳𝗏𝗧𝗏 founded the Sociology with the objective of securing human rights and social justice for the Dalits and the untouchables. He was against sati and child marriages. He was in favor of Western education and demanded free and compulsory primary education up to the age of 12. he propagated his socio-economic ideology through press. He always led a selfless life devoted to the upliftment of Dalits among the Hindu society. Phule, one of the first non-Brahmin radicals to lead a movement for uplift and reform, was a student educated in mission schools in colonial Bombay Presidency, and his intellectual formation was an admixture of missionary polemic against the depredations of traditional Hindu society, evangelical Christianity, free thinking, radical rationalism, and the subaltern culture of low caste agricultural labor in rural Maharashtra. His education in liberal individualism and belief in natural rights assimilated to the Orientalist critique of Hinduism and egalitarian zeal and belief in a world constructed according to the principles of scientific reason and not ascriptive values or hierarchies. This articulated the old order of things for Phule in his construction of the lower caste community as historically oppressed by Brahmins from the time of Aryan conquest to the present day situation in which Brahmins had nearly monopolized the opportunities offered by colonial administration. He telescoped his contemporary critique into the past. Phule's subaltern history was constructed as essentially a narrative of Brahminical tyranny, preparing an historical agency for the lower caste groups through a revised reading of Hindu scripture and epics which inscribed their presence as a peaceable and egalitarian kingdom of Bali Raja, conquered and hierarchized by the tribes of Parshuram, the Aryan Brahmins, and incorporated into their hegemony through the imposition of caste hierarchy and ritual ordination as untouchable and exterior. Phule founded the 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧 Samaj in 1873 to challenge the claims of the Brahmin dominated Pune 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧 𝗚𝗶, a nationalist civic association organized to press for reforms and represent the subject population to the colonial power, to speak for the nation. The uncompromising radicalism of Phule and other more moderate lower caste organizations were united to their hostility to the domination of upper caste in their campaigns for education, administrative recruitment, the reform of social practices, and the conduct of rituals without Brahmin priest. In Phule's discourse, the community was constructed as Marathas or Atishudras, floating signifiers made meaningful by their discursive relation to the other elements of Western Indian popular culture, rigidly opposed by the Aryan Brahmins and articulated in the new arenas of representation. By giving a discursive presence to antagonism, Phule and other colonial non-Brahmin ideologues affirmed antagonisms as constitutive of the social. Dr. Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar was born on 14th April 1891 in a small town and military cantonment of Mau near Indore in Mahar caste, which is known as untouchable caste in Maharashtra. After doing high school from Satara, Maharashtra in 1907, Ambedkar got admission in Elphinstone College, Bombay. He was given Gaikwad scholarship by Maharashtra Gaikwad of Baroda for his study in college, and with this scholarship itself he got admission in Columbia University, USA, and did his MA from there in 1915. He was the first Indian among untouchables who went abroad for higher education. He got PhD in 1917 from Columbia. In 1916, after submission of his PhD thesis, he went to London for the study of law and also took admission in London School of Economics and Political Science for the study of economics. In 1921, he got the degree of Masters of Science and also PhD on his thesis entitled The Problem of the Rupee from London University. Simultaneously, he did bar at law. In 1923, Ambedkar started his law practice and also devoted himself for the upliftment of Dalits, the depressed class, and poor. In 1930, he became the president of the All India Depressed Class Association. In 1936, he formed an independent labour party, which later on turned into All India Scheduled Caste Federation. On 7th August 1942, Ambedkar became the member of the Council for Governor General. In his chairmanship, the Constitution of India was drafted. On 3rd August 1949, he took the charge of the law minister in the government of India. In 1955, he formed the Bharatiya Buddha Mahasabha. Writings of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. The untouchables, who are they? Who were the Sudra? states and minorities, emancipation of the untouchables, annihilation of caste. Generally, the word Dalit includes those who are designated in administrative parlance as scheduled caste, scheduled tribes and other backward classes. However, in common political discourse, the term Dalit is so far mainly referred to scheduled caste. Traditionally, according to the Hindu code of conduct, the untouchables were placed at the bottom of hierarchy and had different names in different parts of the country. They were called Sudras, Atisudras, Chandals, Antyajas, Parihas, Dates, Panchamas, Avarnas, Namasudras, etc. The word Dalit is a common usage in Marathi, Hindi, Gujarati and many other Indian languages, meaning the poor and oppressed persons. It also relates to the suppression of culture, way of life and value system, and more importantly the denial of dignity. It has essentially emerged as a political category. Dalit is a byproduct of the Ambedkar movement and indicates a political and social awareness. Ambedkar adopted a different approach and philosophy for the emancipation of scheduled caste. He wanted to liberate the Dalits by building an egalitarian social order which he believed was not possible within the fold of Hinduism, whose very structures were hierarchical, which relegated the Dalits to the bottom. He asserted that the Dalits should come forward and assert for their own cause. He gave them a mantra: educate, organize and agitate. With the advent of Ambedkar into the Indian political arena during 1920s, the issue of social reforms achieved a new dimension. He was of the opinion that until and unless the downtrodden themselves came forward to fight their battle, no one else could alleviate their grievances. No one else could know better than them about their own state of affairs. Ambedkar impressed upon the people to understand their own affairs themselves. Self-awakening, he believed, could provide them necessary strength to fight against evils in the society. According to Ambedkar, the Vedas, Smritis and Shastras were all instruments of torture used by Hinduism against the untouchables. In fact, it was Ambedkar's subaltern perspective which pierced through the Shastras to reveal their true face. He emphasized in his Annihilation of Caste that the Smritis and Shastras were not the embodiment of religion but a system of rules to deprive the untouchables even of their basic needs and deny them equal status in the society. And another aspect of Ambedkar's subaltern approach for the emancipation of Dalits and their empowerment was his distinct formulation of Indian nationalism in opposition to the dominant discourse of Hindu nationalism as represented by Raja Ram Mohan Roy, B.G. Tilak, Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru. His conception of nationalism articulated and synthesized the national perceptions and aspirations of the downtrodden. Ambedkar's alternative form of nationalism, popularly known as Dalit Bahujan Samaj, also incorporated the subaltern philosophy of Jyotirao Phule and Periyar E.V. Ramaswamy Naicker. He constructed an anti-Hindu and anti-Brahmanical discourse of Indian nationalism. It aimed at establishing a casteless and classless society where no one would be discriminated on the basis of birth and occupation. Within the Dalit Bahujan framework of Indian nationalism, Ambedkar built up a critique of pre-colonial Brahmanism and its inegalitarian social setup based on low and high dichotomy of graded caste system. This system of inegalitarianism led to the process of exploitation by the unproductive Brahmanical caste of the various productive castes. Thus, Ambedkar provided a subaltern perspective to see clearly the chameleon of Indian caste-ridden social set deceptively, appearing in crimson colors and the ways to God the interest of the Dalits. Analysis of the writings of Ambedkar. Exploration of concepts. Ambedkar found the need to reflect upon a wide range of concepts, either to substantially explore them, decipher their different determinations, or to chisel and fine-tune them by removing the dross. He adopted different approaches to present them, sometimes in the light of historical developments and at other times in view of contentions. He described himself as a progressive radical and occasionally as a progressive conservative, the qualification progressive being generally present, distinguishing himself from the liberals and the communists depending on the case. When identity assertions took place, he felt the minorities are likely to be the victims. He qualified majoritarianism with strong grades of rule of law, special privileges to minorities and the existence of a civil society which could nurture democracy as a civic virtue. One of the Ambedkar's most important arguments against Hinduism was that caste and untouchability did not let Hindus act as a community. There is an emphasis on moral order. He rarely gave a deductive picture of religions, but went into the sociological moorings that threw up a diversity of beliefs and practices. At the same time, he admitted that a commonly held religious belief has an impact on socially differentiated constituencies. He found a lot of doctrinal cleavages within Hinduism. He had no great fascination for bhakti with which he was nourished in his childhood, castigating the bhakti saints for failing to attract the shastras which provided the normative and sacred grids for sustaining and justifying unjust social institutions. Ambedkar showed an extraordinary interest in Marxism, particularly in the 1950s. All his major writings during his period, Buddha and the Future of His Religion, Buddha and the Dhamma and Buddha and Karl Marx, referred to Marx as the central figure. He identified certain crucial areas on which he agreed with Karl Marx. The task of philosophy is to transform the world. There is conflict between class and class private. Class ownership of property begets sorrow and exploitation, and good society requires that private property be collectivized. He found that on all these four issues, Buddha is in agreement with Marx. He, however, rejected the inevitability of socialism, the economic interpretation of history, the thesis on the pauperization of the proletariat, dictatorship of the proletariat, withering away of the state, and the strategy of violence as a means of seizing power. He felt that the Buddhism, which called for self-control and a moral foundation for society, could provide the missing dimensions for a socialist project, and for the purpose called for a dialogue between Marxism and Buddhism. Therefore, while liberal and modernist alliances of Buddhism were taking place elsewhere, Ambedkar wanted to relocate Buddhism in the trajectory of Marxism and vice versa. In these studies, which he undertook mainly during second half of the 1940s, Ambedkar argued that Buddhism, which attempted to found society on the basis of reason and morality, was a major revolution, both social and ideological, against the degeneration of the Aryan society. It condemned the Varna system and gave hope to the poor, the exploited and the women. It rallied against sacrifices, priestcraft and superstitions. The Buddhist Sangha became the platform for the movement towards empowering and enabling the common man. For Ambedkar, literature which legitimized and instituted the counter-revolution was Smriti literature in general and Manusmriti in particular. It gave birth to the principle of assigning human beings to social roles, reduced the Sudra to servitude and condemned women to ignominy. On the contrary, the governing principle during the Vedic period for assigning social roles was Varna, the principle of worth, which allowed wide mobility although it ordered society hierarchically. The trajectory of social transformation that Ambedkar traced was divided into the following phases: the Vedic society and its degeneration into Aryan society, the rise of Buddhism and the social and moral transformation it set into motion, and finally, the counter-revolution and the rise of Brahmanism. Ambedkar found that the Hindu scriptures do not lend themselves into a unified and coherent understanding. As late as 1936, Ambedkar felt that Hinduism could be redrafted on the basis of Upanishadic thought. For Ambedkar, the Gita is a post-Buddhist text, It is primarily a defense of karma kanda, that is the religious acts and observance, by removing the outgrowth which was grown over it. The Gita advances a set of philosophical arguments to save Brahmanism in the context of the rise of Buddhism and the inability of the farmer to defend itself by a mere appeal to the rituals and practices of the Vedas. He finds that the Gita defends the position of Jaimini's Mimamsa against Badrayan's Brahma Sutras. The Buddha and his Dhamma highlights the central issues that concerned him throughout his life and demarcates his view sharply from that of his adversaries. Ambedkar repeatedly asserted that Buddha has a social message. Caste. Ambedkar understands of caste, and the caste system underwent certain significant changes over the period of his writings. Initially, he had argued that the characteristic of caste was endogamy superimposed by exogamy in a shared cultural ambience. He suggested that evils such as sati, child marriage and prohibition on widow remarriage were the outcome of caste. Further, if a caste closed its boundaries, other castes were also forced to follow the suit. The Brahmins closing themselves socially first gave rise to the system of caste. Ambedkar continued to emphasize the endogamous characteristic of caste, but roped in other features such as the division of labor, absence of interdining and principle of birth, which he had earlier largely absorbed within endogamy. He also found that the caste name is an important feature which keeps inequality in the normative anchor of the caste system. Graded inequality restricts the reach of equality to members of the caste at the most. Ambedkar thought that caste is an essential feature of the Hindu religion. The solution that Ambedkar proposed was annihilation of caste. He suggested intercaste marriage and interdining for the purpose, although the latter by itself is too weak to forge any enduring bonds. Further, he felt that hereditary priesthood should go and it should remain open to all the co-religionists endowed with appropriate qualifications as certified by the state. Ambedkar's engagement with untouchability as a researcher, intellectual and activist is much more nuanced, hesitant but intimate as compared to his viewpoint on caste, where he is prepared to offer stronger judgments and solutions. However, with untouchability, there is often a failure of words. Grief is merged with anger. As in the case of the untouchables, Ambedkar attempted to construct a separate identity of Shudras as well as this too during the second half of the 1940s. We find in Ambedkar's works as a great deal of discussions about primitive tribes and what were called criminal tribes. He saw them basically as outside the pale of civilization and blamed Hinduism for confining them to such subhuman levels. He ridiculed the Hindus for applauding their attitude to such degradation in the name of toleration. Ambedkar acknowledged the presence of linguistic and cultural identities, but he was deeply suspicious of them. It is not so much their productivity to cast themselves as a nationality that makes him apprehensive, but their tendency to exclude minorities that too do not share the dominant identity. Ambedkar also took an active interest in the working class movement and sometimes occupied formal positions in the trade unions. He understood their concerns as had lived in a working class locality for over 2 decades. However, he felt that the Indian working class had not come to address the caste question. On the contrary, the division of labor in industrial establishments was based on caste relations, and he pointed out that as long as the working class was fragmented into caste, their common bond would prove too fragile to wage determined struggles. Ambedkar made 2 major contributions in terms of evolving a polity which would extend special considerations to the disadvantaged. He was the first major theoretician in India who argued that consideration for the disadvantaged should be the constitutive basis of the state. He distinguished disadvantaged from difference, cultural, religious, ethnic or linguistic, and approached these 2 issues separately for the adoption of appropriate policy measures. His second contribution was to develop a system of safeguards for the disadvantaged in the general and the untouchables in particular, which could be enforceable, quantifiable and accountable. A system that he evolved from early on, but found its shape at the time of his deputation before the Simon Commission. Privileging Buddhism, while Ambedkar acknowledged the possibility of diverse religious and moral standpoints that were reasonable, he did not see them as equally predisposed towards freedom, equality and fraternity. Buddhism alone cherished such goals comprehensively and offered a complementarity to freedom, equality and fraternity. To conclude, it can be stated that both in his training and in his vision of life, Ambedkar was deeply aware of the larger dynamics of the world, its complexity and differential bearing on social groups, localities and nations. He was pragmatic in his approach. David 𝗳𝗓𝗛 was born in Rawalpindi, Pakistan in October 1947. 𝗳𝗳𝗛 is one of the many prolific writers who participated in the creation of Subaltern perspective. He is a founding member of Subaltern Studies group. Noteworthy is the fact that since 1982, at least all his articles and books were illustrative of the practice of subaltern writings. Writings of 𝗳𝗳𝗛: The Quit India Movement in Gujarat 1980, The Peasant Nationalist of Gujarat, Kheda District 1917-1934, The Coming of Devi, Adivasi Assertion in Western India 1987, Peasant Resistance in India 1858-1914, Subaltern Studies 8, Essays in Honor of Ranajit Guha 1994, Feeding the Baniya Peasants and Usurers in Western India 1996, Gandhi in His Time and Ours 2003, Histories for the Subordinated 2006, Missionaries and Their Medicine, A Christian Modernity for Tribal India 2008. 𝗳𝗳𝗛's interest in subaltern perspective was stimulated by his participation in the Subaltern Studies project, which under the inspiration of Ranajit Guha as one of its chief objectives of the study of the relationships of domination and subordination in India. He was inspired by the work of Western Marxist historians, notably E.P. Thompson on System of Moral Economy and Eugene Genovese and Elizabeth Fox Genovese on the blend of ruthless exploitation with the paternalism in the slave system of the American South. These influences, coupled with insights gained from the writings of Karl Marx, Antonio Gramsci, Michael Foucault, Pierre Bourdieu, and in the context of Western India, D.D. Kosambi, Jairus Banerjee and Frank Berlin, have provided some of the main foundations for his work. David 𝗳𝗳𝗛 has used the subaltern perspective in his study, The Coming of Devi. This is basically a movement among Adivasis of Western India to change their established way of life. 𝗳𝗳𝗛 tried to look at subaltern perspective from his study of the Devi movement in South Gujarat, Western Maharashtra region. He observes the mass movement in South Gujarat in early 20th century by the native masses, and it was termed as Devi movement. It was peaceful, led by tribals themselves, spread over a large region, involved a considerable number of people and focused on bringing social reform among the tribals. 𝗳𝗳𝗛 notices that in this way the existing observers of the tribal life had completely denied the tribals any initiative and decision making capacity or any ability to decide what is good for them. Such denial of existence to the tribals or as general case to other subaltern group is what 𝗳𝗳𝗛 and others following the subaltern perspective. The Coming of Devi by 𝗳𝗳𝗛 is a work on the assertion of the Adivasis in Western India against the Shaukars, the moneylenders. The Devi movement started as a small propitiation ceremony among the fisher folk of Palgur Taluk in late 1921. Later, it spread in other parts of Gujarat. In the case of Devi movement, 𝗳𝗳𝗛 noticed that the tribals are involved themselves in a social reform movement, not merely as an effort of reforming themselves by getting rid of the drinking habit, but also as a rebellion against the domination of the Parsi liquor vendors who had brought them into debt bondage, and also against the domination by large landlords. This Devi was supposed to have come from the mountains to the east, and she expressed her demands through the mouth of spirit mediums. The medium sat before the crowd. The holding red clothes in their hands, they began to shake their heads. Then they pronounced the commands of Devi. Stop drinking liquor and toddy. Stop eating meat and fish. Live a clean and simple life. Man should take bath twice a day. Women should take bath thrice a day. Have nothing to do with Parsis. One of the enduring secrets of the subaltern perspective is that it existed only as a broad framework. Three kinds of problems were pointed out by Ранjit Guha. One is that the term subaltern was not adequately defined or identified. 2. The subaltern perspective had already been in use for a very long time. 3. The idea of subaltern was a relative concept. Subaltern was always relative to something or something else. It referred to something that was below. Below what? Below that which was above. Were such distinctions, even though they were not very strict, acquired meaning through the practice of subaltern studies. In this regard, one could take the studies done by 𝗧𝗦𝗔𝗧 to be illustrative. There was also a problem that the distinction between the subaltern and the elite was considerably a context dependent distinction. Subaltern studies emerged around 1982 as a series of journals, articles published by Oxford University Press India. A group of Indian scholars trained in the West wanted to reclaim their history. Its main goal was to retake history for the underclasses, for the voices that had not been heard. Previous proponents of subaltern studies find alternate sources to locate the voice of subaltern historically.